Right, I've got 3:30, and so it's time to get started. This is the session on programming. If you looked in your brochure, you noticed that the panels, my name is Larry Davenport, by the way, from Foster City, California. For those of you who say, where's that? It's near San Francisco. Panelists Al Stevens and Norm Wilcox, and for those of you who will notice that we don't have Al Stevens with us. He was unable to get out of Europe. So John Kaltenthaler from Pocono Pines, Pennsylvania, has kindly consented to step in and help out. And also to my other side, Norm Wilcox from Georgetown, Ontario, right? All right.
The same side as him? I thought so. Oh, yeah, he said on my other side.
Well, to my right and my far right.
Oh, I can move over on your left.
No. People on the tape didn't know what side you were sitting on anyway, so it really didn't matter. My job today is moderating this, and so I'm going to spend very few minutes before I turn it over to John to start. We did have 3 handouts that we got for this session, programming through music, programming a dance, and programming by Jim Mayo. And I need to mention one thing about the, Jim Mayo asked me to mention one thing about his form here. For those of you who are turning the page and looking at the sample mainstream program, I want you to be aware that this document is still current in its thoughts, but it was written 20 years ago. And so when you look at the examples of the mainstream program, you're going to find some samples on there that were reflecting the mainstream program of 20 years ago. So I would just let you know that so that you're aware. Without further ado, I think, well, actually, before I do give it to John, there are many types of programming to think about, and we're going to try to cover several aspects of that today. And there are the technical aspects of, so how do you go about planning a program? And there is the judgment of how do you judge whether the program you're running is the one you should be doing. And I think we're going to hear from both of our panelists that will hit on the judgment aspect of that. And programming is a pretty broad topic if you think about it. You can program a full season. You can program a single dance. You can program a single tip. The decisions you make while you're calling a tip as to whether you should use this choreography or that choreography in terms of what's happening on the floor in front of you is a form of programming as well. And so we're going to cover quite a variety of things about programming, and we're going to also have a question and answer period before we're done here. I want to remind people that we will have a microphone that we can rove around the floor, so any questions that we have from the floor, we'll make sure they're on the microphone so they get on tape. And the other thing in our modern world now, we have to worry about cell phones. And so there is a request that if you have a cell phone with you, if you would either put it on stun or off, as opposed to being on some kind of a noise, that would be appreciated. And I think that's all the housekeeping. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the microphone over to John Kaltenthaler.
Thank you, Larry. When you talk programming, it's pretty hard to isolate that from some of the other skills we need as callers. Because part of the effects of programming and part of the effects of the other things that you do, such as smooth dancing and timing, will affect the overall program. One of the first things that I like to approach programming with is the programming through music. Because music, as the background vehicle that we use for everything that we do in our calling, will set a mood, a psychological factor, a psychological programming for the dancers. The music that you select by tempo, the music that you select by various rhythms that are used, the music that you select by the orchestrations that are used. There are some people who say, I don't consider it square dance music if there's not a violin. Others say, if it's a yammery violin, and by a yammery violin, that's something which is highly tenor, and you haven't adjusted the treble bass volume controls or mixing controls, it's very penetrating. If you don't know that particular record, you haven't done your job in programming. There are records which I use that if I forget to turn down the treble, Freddie goes, and I know what she's talking about because that's a record that has a high treble mix in the way it was recorded. So that's part of the first thing that you have to do is to know your music. I think that if you know your music and you then select your records both by the manufacturer of the record, you don't want to play all ESP or you don't want to play all hi-hat or all chaparral, but a variety because their orchestration and their blending and their mix of instruments affects your program and the effect that it has on the people. Now, the handout that we have on the programming through music addresses quite a few of these problems. I'm not going to try to read it because I don't think that's the way you should be making a presentation. But another aspect of the programming is the rhythms that you use. And I will say it up front that most of the time we play 2/4 and 4/4 music. There is some 4/4 music that does not dance well, and you should know which ones those are. They may make you as a caller sound good, but are we there because we sound good or to show off how good we sound? Or are we there to program the pleasure for the dancers? And if it doesn't dance smoothly because of the mix of the instrumentation or the emphasis of the feel of the instrumentation, if it creates a Latin beat or a rock beat, that won't dance the same for all people. And your age group that you have, it will cause you to program different music, because if you're dealing with a younger set, and to some of us, younger set is anything under however, and if you then program for the geriatric set, like some of the rest of us, you're going to have a different selection of music. You may even have a different selection of tempo. I had mentioned to the color coaches in the seminar earlier that when we were in Australia, the Australian callers have a tendency to call it 132 to 134. And for many of us, that's too fast. It has slowed down. The most common and most preferable tempo at this time is 126 to 128. You may be calling slower than the 132, but you may not, or you may be calling as slow as 124. Jim Mayo did a study with a few other, about 5 other callers in New England, and they selected tempos varying from 116 up to 136. And different ones seemed fast based upon the words that the caller used. That's a part of your program. Am I wordy in my delivery? Do I have a whole bunch of filler chatter? It's what I sometimes call the diarrhea of the mouth approach, because not everybody is going to be able to use all of the words. You have to be able to program your dance. If the sound is more difficult, cut down on some of the words. Cut down on some of the other aspects of your delivery. That's part of your programming. The other thing, which we don't have a handout on, but is a vital, vital part, is the micro-programming that you use. What do we mean by micro-programming? Those little, small, instantaneous decisions as to what you are to call next. If I have head square through 4, swing through, I can do a number of calls after the swing through. I could do boys trade, I could do boys run, I could do a single hinge, I could do a number of other things. But that decision is a minor decision, it's a minor program change. Do I want to do the same setup each time? That's a micro-programming decision. It may be the same figure. If you ever talk to Earl Johnston on some of these things, he'll say to him it's the same figure. It's not the same figure, but to him it is, because it's the same choreographic effect and the same choreographic endpoint. That's a part of your program. But the other skills that we have to use in that programming is, how well does it dance? How well does it fit together with the hand availability? The ideal way that we do is we give the dancers a geometric pattern that they want to run through, a choreographic exercise where the hand called, the hand availability is right where you need it, when the dancer needs it. Most of the time, and most of the mistakes which callers make of a technical nature have to do with timing and delivery of the call. There are some calls which are inherently, I won't say they're inherently bad, but they are inherently mistimed. They have the centers doing one thing while the ends are doing something else. The call AC-Doocy on the Plus program. You can call that using mainstream terminology, but if you call the boys trade before you have, or the girls trade before you have the boys circulate, whichever the setup is, you have to vary which one of those two directional calls you give first, because it's going to take longer for the circulate, the people to move to their respective finishing spot than the centers who have to do just the trade. That's the part of your programming. How do you put those calls together? If you have a technique where you don't use the correct delivery technique of giving the call in 2 beats, that affects your smoothness, that affects your programming. It feels different to the dancer. And if it feels different, they consider that part of the overall program. And that's your job as a caller, to reduce that uneasy feeling to a minimum. If you use a record that is written in a minor key, and you can tell that by the chord structure of the things, that needs to be done very infrequently, because minor key music is a psychological downer. Most records which use a minor key will end up with a major chord to bring the crowd back up to reality. And if you've ever listened to some of these records, there's a time and a place for you to program that. Generally speaking, I like to use minor key music around the Halloween time, because that feels like more like Halloween than some of the others. We were having a discussion on theme tipping and theme programming. If you program somewhere around Thanksgiving, what is the Thanksgiving tune? And one of the people said, Turkey in the Straw. Well, okay, maybe it is, but I used the other approach to that. I said the only Thanksgiving music that I ever found was, I wish I was a teddy bear. Think about it. The turkey feels that he doesn't want to be part of the scene that way. But programming could be that you want to program for a given evening, and the club is having a Hawaiian night, or the club is having a hobo stew night, an income tax time, or whatever it happens to be. That's another methodology we use on programming. Do we have the music that supports that? Can we figure out our verbal filler that supports that theme? Do we dress appropriately? We program through music with rhythms. I mentioned the 2/4 and the 4/4. Most patter is 2/4, but not all. Some is 4/4. It's pretty hard for you to tell the difference between 2/4 and 4/4, even for those people who are record producers, because unless you see the musical score in front of you, you're not sure whether it's 2/4 or 4/4. It still counts the same. 4/4 music has shuffle step, it has a rock, country rock, it has a hard rock, and it also can have a very melodic, almost a sub-melody within it. And that affects the danceability. And if you're not sure about that, don't program a dance all night long with 4/4 music. It would be slow, sudden death, if you will. It's just not going to be a good, fun evening when you do that. The other aspect of programming that you need to consider will deal primarily with the second handout that you have of looking at a dance which is programmed as to where you place the degree of difficulty, with whether it's easy, whether it's moderate, whether it's hard or workshop or what have you. If you're doing workshop material, if you're going to teach anything, you might want to select a music which is non-distracting. It doesn't have an overriding theme. It might have a strong phrase to it, but it doesn't detract from what it is that you want to say and get across to them as far as the teaching aspect of the particular move that you wish to emphasize. And the other thing about that is that if you can, for the end of the evening, you probably want to do a record that has a tune that is familiar to your dancers, and even if you have them singing along with you, they will leave on a happy note, and you can tell that by their faces. If you're programming and the dancers are feeling your delivery style, you can watch the shoulders on the floor all moving in the same direction at the same time. One of the thrilling things that happened in Australia when we had our mini CALLERLAB convention over there was that whenever any of the 5 of us who were on staff called a star through, every hand in the floor went up at the exact same time. And whether it was by accident or by mistake, when we called a forward and back, everybody in the line went forward and back. And it was a beautiful sight to watch. Does that always happen in your dances? If not, maybe you need to examine how it was that you programmed your particular delivery style. Maybe you weren't exactly with the rhythm of the music. Maybe there were other little technical flaws that you did. But programming can affect the well-being of the dance. At the end of the evening, my favorite comment to hear is, I loved your music, and your timing was so smooth. Everything was worked, and I wasn't tired. On the other hand, if you ask Frank Lane or Marshall Flippo what bothers them, they say, well, if the dancers go to see if their watch is still running, that kind of is an indication that the dance is dragging. On the other hand, if you get there and say, my gosh, is it 9:45 already? Then you know that you've done well. Programming is the vehicle. It's the icing on the cake. It's the wherewithal that enables us to give that dancers that good, enjoyable, moving to the music feeling. And if we do our job with the technical aspects of the timing and the rhythms and the body flow, it's an enjoyable dance. Is it easy to figure it all out? No. But you have to know whether your records are driving, kick them up to the ceiling, or pick them up off to the floor, or is it nice melodic ballad? What is it that you want to do? Your delivery style, all part of the programming. And you can call it showmanship, but that's kind of interrelated to programming as well. None of these things stand alone in the vacuum in the square dance calling profession. But I do believe that if you think about programming sometimes, divide your record case into openers, middles, workshops, closers. And you might want to be surprised sometimes. You say, well, I really like this record, but sometimes I want to use that in the middle, sometimes I want to use that as a closer. What is the choreography that you use? And you want to let, who's going to win each tip, each dance, each evening? The dancer. And if you don't let the dancers win, you haven't done your job as a caller. That's all I'm going to say, Larry.
All right. I'm going to hand the microphone next, or he has his own microphone actually, to Norm.
I'm the one that carries the mic around.
That's right. Take it away.
Okay, thanks, Larry. I'm going to approach this a slightly different aspect, but then any two callers will. You know, you never get the same ideas from two different callers, but it all ends up heading in the same direction. We all know that programming is part of the art of calling rather than the science, so technical aspects of choreography and so on. But this falls into the art of programming. A lot of callers don't do much programming. They rely heavily on their judgment and their artistic sense to allow them to make the right choices. But this is not something that's going to occur overnight. I mean, we're talking about callers who've been calling as long as John has. Which controls mine?
I turned you off.
So until you get to that point where you can instinctively know what to do next, it's best to write some things down and actually take the time to decide what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, what kind of a mood you're going to create for each tip. And write this down, and you'll feel better about it, because if you don't write it down, what will happen is you'll be on edge all night trying to judge where you're going to be. And I find that just the act of writing it down makes a difference. The goal, of course, that I think this needs to be underlined is we offer a dance experience that is satisfying to dancers. And John said this in a different way, but you can't repeat it too often. The dancers came there to dance, and our job is to give them a dance experience that is satisfying. And there are many, many things we have to do, and programming is one of these things which we have to go through in order to provide this evening of entertainment. We talked a bit about music. I'd just like to add my 2 cents worth on that. I think to just go a little bit further with the music, I have my records all sorted by sort of a mood they create in my mind, and it's only in my mind what this record creates for me. It may not create, the same record may not create the same mood for you, and you'll treat it differently. And two callers calling the same piece of music, be it singing call or patter, can treat it totally differently. And on a given night, or a given series of nights, I may treat the same record differently, depending on how it strikes me that night or how I decide to use it that night. So you have to decide basically what does this music tell you? How does it appeal to you? And classify general classification of the record. So you want a quiet, softy piece of music, you know that it's in that group in your record box. Or if you use a laptop that's in this file. We talked about tempo a little bit, and I'm finding that I use a laptop to find music using MP3 files, and I can set my tempo exactly where I want it. And I'm finding that I'm running my tempo at 125 maximum. I'm dealing with older people. As we said earlier, younger people anymore are people who are still working, still have a job. Anybody beyond that, of course, is retired. And I deal a lot with older people. I find that the 125 and lower, they like it better. They can move easy to this music. They won't feel like they're rushing around. But the attitude of the caller affects the program. How does the caller understand the needs of the dancers? You're going to approach each dance. You have to ask yourself, what does this group, in general, what kind of dancing do they like? If it's your own group, you know. If it's a group that you're calling for on the road, it may not be immediately apparent. But sort of fall into three very general categories, and there's, of course, mixtures of this. But some dancers like to be taken to the brink of failure. You know, right out on the edge. They like to, of course, they got to win. And this is sort of like a puzzle-solving type of aspect. Some dancers just like to move to music. They don't care whether the dancing is difficult, but it's easy. All they want to do is just to move to music and feel the wind in their face. And the complexity doesn't really matter too much as long as it feels good. Then there are clubs where sociability aspect is the main key. They've come to have a good time, to chat with their friends, and they take long breaks, and they're hard to get up back off on the floor, and fewer number of tips, and they're shorter tips and longer breaks. You need to know this in advance, because you come in to a club with all kinds of really neat choreographic stuff, and this club likes to sit around and chat and have coffee, you're not going to go over too well. So if it's not your group, it behooves you to kind of maybe find out a little bit about the group, how they react. We can't solve all these situations with one program. You have to have a variety of programs, and if you're, again, calling a guest caller, it behooves you to have a series of programs made out for maybe these three general types of clubs. And if you don't know what's going to happen until you get there, you start your first tip and see what goes on, and you modify your program from that point. But having made one, it's easier to change it than it is to create it out of whole cloth on the fly. If you're going to go into a lot of choreographic complexity, recognize that you're going to maybe suffer, your timing may suffer. Puzzle solving does cut into our timing because of the fact you have to tell people to go here, go there, do this, do that, and our timing suffers. So if you're going to do some puzzle solving type choreography, you have to balance this out with tips that are wind in the face. Like we say, while you're moving forward, you can feel the wind flowing by your ears, and everything moves smoothly without any conscious effort on the dancer's part. And you have to kind of balance this out if you want to use some puzzle-solving stuff. We talked about controlling the programming with music. Of course, the other one is choreography. This is actually probably the easier part because it's all written down. Your CALLERLAB programs are all closely defined. All the definitions are there. We know, or we should know, what makes a given call more difficult. And you all have the standard applications booklets, I'm sure, and this lists the easiest formation and arrangement for every one of the calls on the programs in Mainstream and Plus. And if you decide to go beyond that, recognize that that is now more difficult, be prepared to offer some help. You have to have a variety of choreography. And this, again, is where programming comes into effect. If you don't program what you're going to do in each tip, even if you only have a note jotted down on a piece of paper, every tip will start to sound alike, particularly if you sight call. I made a bunch of these little cards, and these are really handy. I find these are neat when I'm doing guest calling. When I'm doing my own club, and I'll talk about that a little later on, but when I'm out guest calling, I find these are really handy. This one says scoot back, and scoot back's one of our most versatile calls. What can we do after a scoot back? I mean, a simple scoot back, I have to head square through and touch quarter. What can we do after a scoot back? Well, the obvious one, of course, is what's the first thing that comes into your head? Boys run. You can have the centers trade, an ocean wave, have the boys fold. You can do a single hinge. You can cast off three quarters. You can split circulate. You can set up a two-phase line, have the centers of that line scoot back. You can have the centers of a column scoot back. You can have everybody in a column scoot back. Centers of a left-hand wave scoot back. There are all kinds of things you can do with a call. And so what I'll do is I'll put this down on the table, scoot back to my focus for that tip, and we'll start to play. And when I get to the point where I'm sensing that the dancers have reached that brink of disaster, but haven't quite gone over the edge, back off. Don't take it any further. This is as far as they want to go tonight. You may hit a group that is really super knowledgeable about their calls, and you can take it right to the very end. But each tip should focus on something. It should focus on either a call or a combination of calls. For instance, in plus, single hinge and fan the top flows nicely. So perhaps that's a combination of calls you can feature in various setups for that tip. Chase right, followed by Other Than Boys Run, followed by Cast Off 3/4, and then followed by another fan the top. That combination of calls flows very nicely. And it's not something that everybody thinks of. So you're getting a little bit creative at the same time as you're providing flowing dancing, and you're focusing on one thing for that tip. And it may be, you may want to try and take a call, like a simple call like Ferris wheel, and you might want to develop it. We know that for every formation there are 6 and no more arrangements in every formation. For a Ferris wheel, 2-phase lines, I have a, let's see, clockwise? I never really know. No, but I have a what's the other word from digital? Analog. I have an analog watch. The old kind with a hand on it. I never know which one. I call them right hand 2-phase lines. And then something of that clockwise or whatever. So anyway, the normal Ferris wheel, right? Boys, swing 3 boys around Ferris wheel. That setup. You might want to explore the possibilities of taking all 6 arrangements of that 2-phase line and calling Ferris wheel. Before you do that, you've got to back up a little bit and decide how you're going to set these up. And having decided that, will they be able to handle these setups? Can they handle a girl's run out of an ocean wave? Can they handle a boy, girl, ocean wave, have the centers trade and the centers run? Can they do that sort of thing? And so this is all preparation work you have to go through in order for you to even call your first non-standard Ferris wheel. This is all part of programming because you do this in advance of calling this tip. Presentation tools. You have we do 2 types of calling in a tip. There's a singing call and a powder call. And each one has to be, you have to decide what you're going to do with this piece of powder and also what you're going to do with this singing call and how they're going to go together. And a lot of that is covered in that little handout you have for each tip. If you decide that this particular tip you're going to take the Ferris wheel, take it to the nth degree, and then if they get all that, start over again from the left-hand 2-phase line, really, and they get everything. If they dance at all, they've had to really work to do this. So your singing call should be something, I would say, that is going to be uplifting, something that's easy, quick, and upbeat, so they can then relax and get their breath for the next tip. So there's a combination of things, not only programming one piece of music, but the 2 in combination. Are you going to workshop or are you going to dance in this tip? Again, this will determine how you approach your tip, how you're going to program this. Your delivery style, are you going to be soft and smooth? Are you going to croon like Daryl does? Or are you going to really charge ahead and maximum power of the whole tip? Really exciting stuff. Choosing a piece of music is just gets you going, gets the whole floor going, and gets them up to here. This is all a decision you have to make ahead of time. Otherwise, you may decide to do this at the wrong time in your program, and the whole effect will be lost. It may be terrific, but it's in the wrong place. So, what else do I have? We didn't cover actually the handout, just to amplify that a little bit. I have my own here, and I don't know how it compares to the handout, but it's probably pretty close. Tip 1 is a warm-up tip. and I have downwind in the face, no surprises, and a bright singing call. In other words, everybody's got to warm up. This is a physical activity. It's a mental activity. Your dancers haven't thought about square dancing all day, and I'm finding that with older dancers, they haven't thought about it since the last time they were here. They left the dance. I do a lot of afternoon work, and my dancers leave the club at 4:30 in the afternoon. They don't think about square dancing until 2 o'clock the next Wednesday afternoon. So I have to get them thinking square dancing again. And you start to call, and the question crosses your mind, have you been here before? So you need to have it simple, wind in the face, no surprises, bright singing call. Second tip, continuing number one, but maybe increase the degree of difficulty a bit. One of the things which I meant to mention, and I think is very, very important, every dance that you should call every call in that program. So if you're calling a mainstream dance, you should cover every single call in that program. If you're calling a plus dance, you should cover every single call in the plus program. And isn't that hard to do, if you think about it? So this is where you do this. This is where I do this. I try and cover the whole program in those first 2 tips. It doesn't have to be difficult. It's just standard positioning. But I want to, do they recognize these names? Have you heard that before? Now, can you do a crossfire? Can you do a explode the wave? Can you do a, what's the other called it? There's 3 of them I find in plus. Crossfire, explode the wave. Chase right. Chase right. Those are 3. Those are 3 ones which people seem to have a little bit of problem with. So can they respond to these calls? And if they can, fine. If they cannot, now you have a programming decision. Do I want to workshop this, or do I just not bother calling that again? And you can make a show of this. For instance, one of the calls which we use for multiple formations is peel-off. Peel-off can be done from a completed double pass-through, and the second most common place is from I'm a Canadian, so I call it a Z. You probably call it a Z formation, swing through girls fold. However, we now have a call called peel the top. Guarantee you that if you call swing through girls fold and you say the word peel, in a lot of cases, the dancer's ears will shut off, their brain will supply the words the top, and off they go and they end up in a tidal wave. And so then you say, right, get your pen out, and you say, no more peel off. And that always gets a giggle. Or you tell them, that's a beautiful, you did a fantastic job of that, peel the top. Wasn't what I called, but it's the best peel the top I've seen all night. You make a joke out of it. But, so can they respond to these calls? Third tip, if you're going to do any workshopping at all, this is where I would do a workshop. The dancers are now warmed up. They're as bright as they're ever going to be tonight or this afternoon. They're not going to, from here on in, they're going to get starting to tire. So this is the spot where they're as good as they're going to get for a workshop. So what do you workshop? Well, there's all kinds of things you can. There are fewer and fewer new calls that we can use. When I started calling back in the early 60s, it was great. We never had a problem with what to workshop. There were calls being written at a rate of 20 calls per month, literally. And we had an ultimate choice of what to choose for workshops. That doesn't happen anymore. I firmly believe that we have run out of things to do with 8 people who have 2 arms, 2 legs, and can move only in forward and back, or can rotate in multiples of 90 degrees. I think we've just about run out of everything we can possibly do. So the idea of new calls isn't there anymore, unless you own a Burleson book and go back in history and pull out something out of it. But, whatever. Quarterly selections they're few and far between anymore because there are no more new calls being written, really. Not very, 1 a year maybe. So what do we do? Well, the tendency is to pull a call off the next program and use it. I kind of shy away from that. If you're calling a plus dance, I would not pull a call off the A1 list. Because this is subconsciously telling the dancer that the next program is the way you should be. This is the neat stuff. If I wanted to do that, I would go at least 2 programs up and maybe pull something off the A2 list that I can get plus dancers to do, or maybe even a C1 call. There are a lot of simple calls, relatively speaking, in the other programs, which you can use at a plus dance if you want something new to workshop for that night, which they're going to, no need to worry about remembering this just for the night to play. Or you can take a call they already know and expand its use into various arrangements and formations. So that's kind of a workshop tip. Then fourth tip, feature call from the program. Maybe you have to do a walkthrough to get them to do something a little different with that call. The singing call in third tip would be a rouser, because you make them work. I would put a rouser singing call with a simple pattern, something they can just do in their sleep, but with excitement. I have down here that I would put in a sing-along call in the fourth tip. People love to sing. And going back to what John said, you have to know your group as to the age group, as to what they will sing along with. And fortunately for me, I deal a lot with seniors, and all the songs that I know, they know. And I told them my grandfather taught me this song, and it's something that they've known, is put out in the 20s and 30s. I can sell that more than I can sell something which is currently in use, something currently being sung today. I find I can do a better job of that, which is fine, because the dancers are the same way. They're in their older years, and they appreciate these older songs. They can sing along. They like to do that. Tip 5 is if there's a six-tip dance. Tip 5, ease off on the choreography. Maybe show a cute figure, and the singing call kind of soft. Maybe this is the place to do a love song. And in the last tip, if we dance 2-hour dances, and you dance about 6 tips, my last tip will be number 6. No surprises. Again, smooth choreography. And then we come to the singing call. And this is always a good thing that callers knock back and forth. Should we finish on a high note? Should we finish on a low note? Should we have them climbing the walls, or should we have them going home singing "I Want a Girl, Just Like the Girl That Married Dear Old Dad" type of thing? And either one works. Either one works. Depends on, this is where your judgment comes in, again, at the end of the night. What will work for this group tonight? If they want to go out high, they want to go out soft. And you pick the one you think works. So, the only time I've ever violated this was at a camp one weekend. I was doing a Saturday night dance, and I'd done the whole weekend, and I was coming up to the last dance Saturday night. And we were in a pavilion where people could come and see from the outside. They had this concrete pad which will hold about 10 squares, and this building erected with windows with flaps that opened up so you could look in from the outside. We had a great bunch of people from the other campground had come to watch us dance. And I wanted to make an impression. When I asked me why, but I just, all of a sudden I did. And I picked a Hank Williams Jr. record, Rowdy Friends. And it's on Chaparral. And it starts out, "Do you want to dance? Do you want to party?" And I just belted it. And normally I would never do this, because what do you follow it with? This is your rousing singing call for the night, maybe. What are you going to follow it with? Well, I managed to get through the dance. I did follow it with something, but I did it for an effect, and I got the effect I wanted, and then I had to deal with the consequences of how did I follow this. But anyway, that's about all I had to say, Larry.
And I think John had some additional thoughts you wanted to put on the table.
How many of you have been hired to call a dance, and the first thing they say, "Hey, we're going to have a plus workshop for the half hour before the dance"? Is that a good time to workshop? They don't know you. If you're calling there on a guest caller basis, on a regular basis, it's okay, perhaps. But if you're there as a guest caller, they need to get used to your voice before they're going to be able to dance smoothly. Norm mentioned this. He said, you use the first tip. Let them get used to you to build that trust, to make sure they know you're going to give them enough time to do the figure. They don't have to rush. They don't have to run. You give them time to do it. The other major question that I have is, how do you like to program your singing calls? Same figure repeated 4 times, or 4 different figures? If you think back, and how many of you have been dancing more than 30 years? That's good. You remember now that when we danced years ago, we used to walk the dancers through the figure, didn't we? And everybody did it. Everybody knew how to do it, and they did the figure 4 times. Everybody was happy. We didn't make it complex. Then callers began to say, gee, if we did this, we could do that, we could do this, we could do that. Callers became enamored with the complexity of choreography. And when they did that, and we eliminated the walkthroughs, and we added the ability of sight calling, what did we do to the dancers? We beat them to death. Part of your job as programming is to figure out a way to let them get that wind in their face. Let them win every tip, every dance, every evening, every season. Now, I have no objection if you wish to change your figures 4 times in a given singing call. But when you do that, make sure that the figures time out, make sure that the figures work, and make sure that they let the dancers win. There's lots of ways of doing that in the selection of calls that Norm talked about. Part of your job is to give the programming in such a way that they get a variety of arrangements and formations from which you can legitimately do the call. Don't make them think like callers in order to survive. But we as callers beat up on the dancers a lot. Too much is my judgment. We really need to back off a little bit and let them dance more dance. One of the founding ideas of CALLERLAB in 1971, when the charter members who got together with it, they said, let's put the dance back into dancing, into square dancing. We took it away from the dancers. We need to let them have it back. And you do this through these things that Norm and I have been talking about, and Larry knows firsthand as well. Select your music, select your flows, select your themes that you want to use, select your choreography, but let the dancers win. If we don't do that, we're not going to have anybody to call to before much longer. You really can't do it. There are 4 programs that you call every night. The one you called, the one you should have called, the one your wife told you to call in the first place, and the one you would like to have called.
Just to add to what John said, I still walk through some of the singing call figures with my at least particularly with my first year dancers and my second year dancers. If I have a figure which I think is can be danced by them, but it's a little bit different, I'll walk them through it, no problem. Something else I'm going to say, and I forgot what it was. It'll come to me later.
Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask our 2 panelists to hopefully have a bit of conversation about a couple of different aspects of programming. We've talked a lot about the full evening. We've talked about the individual tips within the evening, but we haven't really touched that much on what do you do from a programming point of view when you're going to be at the Saturday night dance has got 10 other callers on it and you've only got 1 tip. How do you want to approach that particular programming situation? And the other one I'd like to maybe have you, one or both of you, comment on. We've talked about that individual night. We've sort of alluded to you've got a home program and now you've got to come back and you've got to do something with them next week and the next week after and the next week after and the next week after. So maybe some comments on how you want to approach a season of a home program. Either of you want to take a first shot?
I'll take a crack at it. Talking about the first part, calling 1 tip in a multiple program, I got to be careful what I got to say here because we're doing it tonight. Canadians are putting on the dance tonight, and we have 11 of us, so we're all going to call 1. I'm just going to call 1 piece, either a singing call or a patter call. So this is a very difficult position to be in because
we're all going to go and watch.
We're all going to go and watch. You don't have a chance to experiment. I think you have to call stuff that you know is safe within the knowledge of the group you're calling to. And so that means you've got to listen and watch what goes on. Hopefully you're not the first caller up. If you're the first caller up, okay, you're going to call standard formation, standard arrangements, and just call recognition type of stuff where you just call stuff and then everybody else watches what they do. So you watch what the floor does to what all the guys ahead of you have done. How do they respond to that? And then you judge what you're going to do, how far you can go. But you can't go to the edge because if you lose, you have no way to recover. And they won't think of you that tip as being something enjoyable.
I think this happens to all of us at one time or another, especially if you belong to a callers association and you have dances for beginners. You have a parade of callers. What's the simple solution and the thing to advise, other than what, as Norm has said, use your best patter record or use your best singing call. Because dancers don't care how much you know. You don't have to try to show off. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And if you care about the dancers and you let them dance with the wind in their face, and you select your best material, you're going to come out on top because you've done a great job and you've let them dance with the wind in their face and they felt good about themselves, they felt good about being successful, and they completed. Betsy Gotti uses something which she thought about for a while, and she has tried it, and we did this the last time we had a Caller Association dance for relatively new dancers. She said, if you ever look at the gymnasts in an Olympic event, or when they do the vaults, or they do things like that, they always end up at the end, they raise their hand like, we won. She decided she would try this with dancers, said, hey, we didn't lose, we all won. So at the end of the dance, we're winners. And psychologically, that gets everybody in a good mood. And as you finish the dance, you say, what did we do? We won! And they all react accordingly. What a great thing to do when you have a parade of callers. Then the guy comes up and said, okay, here's Norm. And Norm goes, How many of you have been at a club where somebody in the club had recently died and the president says, you all remember Charlie? He died last night. Here's Norm.
Come on with it. What singing do I pick?
Yeah.
He's gone at last.
Gone at last. Yeah, right. How did I know that was going to happen? The other question that Larry asked was what?
The home program. The home program, and so you've got a great program for tonight's dance. What are you doing for next week, the week after, and 2 months from now?
The caller who calls here this week, somewhere else next week, he can develop a superb program. He knows how to do that. He knows how to build that he or she. And if we use the term guys, if we say he, we mean he or she. Please understand that. We're not sexist. We may be prejudiced, but we're not sexist. You build a program because you know what you want to do. And you build a program for your dancers for whom you call on a regular basis. You want to be able to build that for a season. Understand how you can take them through. If you call for a club that you're the caller twice a month and there's someone else for the other 2 weeks of the month, or you dance once a month, that's a different game. You might want to figure out what you're going to do this week, what you're going to do the next time, the third time, and the fourth time, and maybe you'll call for them 6 times a year. You don't want to call the same singing calls. You don't want to you may use the same pattern records. I really don't think the dancers hear the music in the pattern calls where they will recognize what the record is. Singing calls, they know.
Okay, take a deep breath. Turn the tape.
Right. We flip the tape over. If you didn't flip the tape over, you're home set. Too bad. You can also get these on CDs because they go for a longer period of time. Yeah, or MP3. All those systems are available. The other thing that I would say on that, if you're programming and you're fortunate enough that you're going to be moving around, but you may be in an area where you're calling for different clubs, but you have a lot of the dancers that travel back and forth. They don't want to hear the same singing calls tonight, tomorrow night, the next night. They may accept different hoedowns, and we all have our favorite hoedowns. And Norm mentioned the fact that if you're programming a dance and the dance is labeled mainstream, you have an obligation to use every mainstream call. We all have our favorite calls, and there are some calls that we just somehow don't remember to call. The ones that I have difficulty remembering in the plus programs are the 3/4 tag the line, unless I really think about it, and Dixie Grand. Not difficult to do. You can do them where they have smooth flowing choreography, but I must force myself to use those every time. When mainstream programs still had fan the top, I used it all the time. I called it every night because I always did it after a head square through 4, touch a quarter, scoot back, single hinge, fan the top. The single hinge to the fan the top gave the body flow, gave the hand availability. It was 100% winner. Nobody ever broke down on it. Maybe in a singing call, I had to say, hey, we're going to have a pass the ocean to a fan the top. Give the dancers a shot on that. Tell them, clue them. They know what to expect. And then you deliver it, and it works out great for you. But programming the same club over and over and over again every week is a little tougher job. Your job as a caller is a lot tougher than it is for the traveling caller. And when Herb Eggener was asked that question by Marshall Flippo one time, Herb looked up and he says, I like to think I call well enough I don't have to leave town the next night.
The other The other thing you may be involved in on a night-to-night basis is the workshop. If you are running a workshop to teach a group of dancers a particular program, and this may take a whole season to do. So you lay out all the calls that you want to teach in a checkoff list, and then across the top are all the dates. And as you teach each call, you mark it off, and then you know that each week you're going to teach however many calls you decide to teach, that however your program runs, whether you teach one, whether you teach two, whether you teach three. And of course, if you're working Mainstream Plus, you're probably going to teach one and maybe two, but never more than two. If you're in the Advanced and Challenge programs, you're probably going to use two or three a night in order to get through the program in 1 year. But going back to Mainstream Plus, you teach one call, but the next week you've got to reteach that call, and the following week you've got to review the call. So you teach it the first week as if you've never taught it before, which of course it is true. Why did I say that? I can't believe I said that. The first week you teach it right from the very bottom. The second week you teach it as if you had never taught it before. And the third week you call it. So you know that these are things you're going to do throughout the night. And you have a set program for your workshop, warm-up tip, review what we did 3 weeks ago, reteach last week's, teach a new call, and those two could be inverted, and then dance these calls. And you have to call everything you've taught every night, all the way through. You can't teach spin the top and then not call it for 6 weeks. You've got to call it every single night from that point on to the end of the program. And as John says, we all have our calls that we like to use and calls that we have to force ourselves to use. I've had to force myself to use box finat in the basic program because I don't know, it's just one of those things. I have to really work at. So what I do is I after my second tip, I always lay out on the table, always lay out a sheet of paper with all the calls for that program on it. And then after the second tip, I go through that list. Is there anything I haven't called yet? Mark it down on my pad of paper that I have there, which I keep track of my corners on. Mark down all the calls I haven't used yet. Make sure I use them in the next tip. Fold and cross fold.
I think we often forget to use fold and cross fold. How many of you use it on a regular basis? All the time? How many of you never missed your corner? What liar's going to tell me they never missed their corner? Yeah. Good, Ron. Thank you. Yeah, right. Well, I think that just as Norm says, we don't use them. There was a singing call put out on a label that I won't mention, but basically the figure had Ladies Lead Dixie Style to a wave, and he had Boys Trade and Swing. Anything wrong with that? When you do the Boys Trade, what side are they to the girl? Left hand. Cross run, fold, cross fold. Anything would have been a good call, but not trade and swing. So what do you do if that's the way the singing call is written? You program different choreography to smooth it out. We were talking, if you talk about smooth choreography, part of your programming is there an inherent danger in it? A lot of singing calls have come out with a do-si-do and an 8-chain 4, followed by a swing. Terrible, terrible combination. Pass through and chase right. To my judgment, a terrible combination. Better combination is walk and dodge, chase right, because it's a continuity of action for the ladies. We beat the dancers to death with recycle. If we have the centers in motion first, there's a greater chance that the girls will indeed fold and then follow as a no-hands call, and it smooths it out. That's part of our micro-programming decision. How can we make that decision to program it for dancer comfort, for dancer smoothness? Have we done our job as professionals callers to make it smooth and the wind-in-the-face dancing? Got any more questions?
First thing, I want to get to the group here to ask some questions of these fellows to get some thoughts about programming that you've got in mind that you'd like to ask them of. But one of the things I wanted to say just before we do the question and answer, I think they both hit upon it. Lots of preparation goes into being able to call a well-programmed dance. I think they also hit on that you need to be flexible, because some nights your group is going to be ready to dance what you programmed, and some nights they're not going to be able to. So if you're going to have the flexibility of changing that program you're using that night, or the degree of difficulty or the complexity or whatever else you're going to change that night, it's because you've done enough preparation and it's not going to bother you that they can't do what you came there planning to do. And the other thing I guess I wanted to ask, or just say, is that if you do all that work on that programming, don't be so wanting to make sure they have all those pearls of wisdom you program, because if the program that you're going to call with all those pearls of wisdom isn't what they want that night, you still need to be able to be flexible and go with the flow and call what you really should be calling that night, because really at the end of the time, you want to see satisfied, successful dancers. You want to see smiles on their face and they're having fun. And if you just simply are going to call your program, whether they like it or not, you're not going to have that kind of a reaction to it.
Yeah, our job is that we are entertainers, and they've come to be entertained. They paid us money to entertain them, and that's our job.
I want to throw out a question to the group. Do you call differently when there's a full moon? I'm serious.
Dick Jones, a caller who's passed away some time, he lived in New Jersey, I think. Yes. Yeah. He said he spent a whole season, he tracked the phase of the moon versus success at his dances, and he found there is a relationship. If the moon's full, you better be prepared to call an easy program.
It could be full moon. It could have been a bad weather day. It could have been the group that just has low energy that night. Lots of different things. Do we have any questions from the floor? And we're going to bring the microphone to you. Okay, I was going to do that, Norm. I'll let you sit up here, but that's okay.
It's all right. I need to get up anyway.
Please state your name, rank, serial number for the tape.
Harold Lehman from California, private. Some time ago, this has been 3 or 4 years ago, and also in note services, you two gentlemen, and I never heard it mentioned here, do you have 3 or 4 figures that you use when you start your first tip to kind of check the level of the floor?
Yeah.
Did you want to know anything more?
What are they? Oh! Golly. First of all, they're figures I know will work. I said before, I'm basically a sight caller, but I have to define before I call any resolutions based on my sighting. If I'm with a group I don't know, and of course if you're with your own group, all this is by the way. But this is a group we don't know, so I'm going to call sequences I know work. Either things I have memorized or things I can track mentally. For instance, I know that heads past the ocean, extend, swing through, boys run, Ferris wheel, square through 3, element left works. I just made that up. But because I tracked number 1 man in my head. Head square through, swing through, boys run, Ferris wheel. Head square through, do-si-do, touch a quarter, scoot back. Not necessarily do-si-do, what did I say that? Touch a quarter, scoot back, boys run, right and left through, slide through, element left. Things like that. While I'm watching the floor, are they dancing these things smoothly? Are they executing every call smoothly? Or are they fussing? Then we get into floor testing. You got lines of 4. Forward and back, everybody square through 4. Do they execute the square through accurately into a trade by formation, or don't they? So these are things you play with. But yeah, I have stuff I use at the beginning that I know works.
Yeah, I would add to that. I'd like to use that floor to test their dancing to what I'm calling. Are they moving to the music? Are they taking the full time that I allocate to them? Are they clipping their timing a little bit here or there? Are they using a bad habit? You know, one of the things that happens so often today is a lot of dancers are using the waist swing do-si-do. Well, I don't particularly like to see that. A lot of the dancers don't know the difference between half sachet and roll away. I don't like to see that. I might use that as one of the things in the first tip to see whether they do a half sachet, and then I'll call roll away, and I say there's supposed to be a difference, and go on. Not chastise them, but just remind them that, hey guys, you really didn't do that first thing right. Try to dance it correctly. I'm going to give you the time. I use figures that work out exactly right for the positioning on the floor so that they have a full 16-beat promenade. What happens in a grand square is so frequently the callers after the grand square will say Allemande and weave, and the dancers meet halfway around. They got 16 beats to move and only 8 beats to get there. or I should say they have 16 beats to get there, but it only takes 8 beats because it's 8 steps. How do we avoid that? We don't use that Allemande and weave. 4 ladies chain over and back works. Horse circle to the left, and when they get around to the third quarter of the third quadrant, call the swing your partner and promenade, or Allemande left and come back and promenade. Any number of decisions we can make, but we're watching the dancers to make sure that they're moving to the music, they're moving to what we have called, and they dance it with correct styling and proper positioning. And if they do that, then I make the determination based upon the program that I'm hired to call that night to use the other components of that dance program. And I have to force myself to use some calls that I forget to call sometimes. And I, just like Norm said, I have a list there on the thing and said, what calls haven't I used yet? And then I make sure that I use those calls. Because if we cheat the dancers, and I use the term advisedly, if we cheat the dancers by not using a call on that program, what happens if the next caller doesn't use that caller, and the next caller doesn't use that call, and the next caller doesn't use that call, and then you come there expecting to be able to call a mainstream program, and they haven't heard that call in 6 months or a year. Are they going to dance it for you? He says he has to force himself to do a box to that. Somebody told me here at this convention, and I can't even remember where he was from, so it's not important. He said, the dancers won't let me call box to that. Don't do it, if that's the way the dancers are going to be. But what could you substitute for that? Okay, that's part of your job as well. How often do you hear callers in an Alamo ring? Swing through, turn through. Bad. Where are the dancers? The girls are facing in and the boys are facing out if they did the swing through correctly. How do you adjust for that? How do you program around it? Turn her by the right. It meters the same. The flow is there, and it gets the dancers to the proper spot. Norm?
Yeah, just adding one more thing to what you asked. I recently called a weekend, and the Friday night dance was programmed in the old basic program, which is the first 53 calls in mainstream. And some of these dancers had never been to a caller other than their teacher. And so my first tip started out with, after the circle left, Allemande left, right and left, grand promenade home, was heads go forward and back, right and left through. Same ladies chain across. Sides go forward and back, right and left through, same ladies chain across. And then I either chained them back or circled left and rolled a half sachet twice. But that sort of choreography for the first tip was all I did. And I did that to gain their confidence. I'm not going to blow them away. I'm not going to call stuff that they can't do, because they are very, very fragile, and they can be damaged so quickly.
We have a question over here on the side.
Jerry Silverstein, San Jose, California. Norm, how do you know when you bring the dancers to the edge without going over?
It's a judgment thing. I can't guarantee that I'll know in every single case, but you start to see a slight faltering. You start to see a slight hesitation on the dancer's part, and you may have to start using helper words to get them through what you're trying to get them through. You know that is now probably the most difficult thing you've done in that tip. I guess that's really how I judge. Watching the dancers execute the calls. Are they doing it? Bang, bang, bang. What else you got? Type of thing. Or they look around and they start getting hesitant about how they're doing it. At that time when you see this and you can jump in with some helper words like supposing scoot back, for instance, to take a call. It's a call that they're hesitant with, and the boys are heading to the center. You may drop in a few words like, okay, boys turn, come back to the girl flip over. In other words, you put in some helper words to get them through that scoot back. I guess that's probably how I determine this. Again, a switch goes off in my head. It says, you just about got the edge of this is as far as you're going to go with this. Whatever I'm doing, this is as far as you're going to go. You won't be able to take it any further.
I think the other thing that happens there is if you're calling for a group that you don't normally call for, but they have a regular club caller. If you call a head square through for a swing through and just have a little hiccup, this looks to see whether the boys trade, they do a spin the top, or the boys run, and you know that they've been dancing to a very predictable caller who always calls it the same way. And maybe you have to change your timing or just saying, be careful. For instance, if you're doing the plus program, square through four, Single circle to wave, boys trade while the girls fold. Be careful, peel off. They may do a peel the top, and as Norm says, it was the best peel the top that I've ever seen, but it's not what I called. You know what kind of a dance you're going to have to do because they are expecting one thing and one thing only. And you have to make that instantaneous microprogramming decision. What things can I call that are not going to automatically be predictable, but are not going to create problems for the dancers? When you do such calls as crossfire, that's not used as much by some of the callers in the Plus programs. And one of the things is you may want to do in that third tip where Norm says that you might want to do a workshop thing. Use a variation of a formation and an arrangement that enables you to give them variety without complexity. And you still let the dancers win, provided you've worked it out. And a lot of that affects how you have taught, how you teach your particular dancers and the things that you do there. So it's involved with programming, but it's not strictly a programming decision. It's how you react to the dancers. And I don't know if that answers your question, Jay, completely or not. If it does, that's good. Okay. Are there any other questions anybody may have? Yes, sir.
Lon Farrell, Emergence, California. How would you guys, or anybody else in the audience, approach a programming slot at a festival with strange dancers, and you're assigned 1 hour workshop?
What's the dance program? Is it mainstream or plus?
Extended plus is the words.
I would select diamonds.
Really?
And the reason I would select diamonds, I think it's perhaps one of the most versatile calls available in the Plus program, because I not only can do a standard parallel diamonds, but I can put it's a boy-boy, girl-girl type of diamond. I can do point-to-point diamonds. I can do facing diamonds. I had a caller ask me this very question at a national. He said, what am I going to do, John? I said, what's your assignment? He says, I'm to do a Plus workshop for an hour. I said, what call did they tell you? He said, anything. I said, do diamonds. He said, I can't do that for an hour. I said, you shouldn't be doing a Plus workshop. And he looked at me like I was some kind of ogre, but I was serious. If he can't do an hour on diamonds, I don't think you should be doing a Plus workshop. I mean, that's my answer. I don't know if Norm...
Yeah, I would agree, because there are so many things. After you've gone through parallel diamonds, point-to-point diamonds, you can even set up them into, even though it's a Plus dance, you can actually set up diamond within a diamond by having, say, swing through boys run couples hinge, center couples hinge, and you've got diamond within a diamond. Everybody see that? And this is something most dancers probably never seen. And then you very carefully have them circulate, inner diamond circulate, outer diamond circulate, and wherever you want to go with that. So that's, there's so many things you can do with it. Master.
I don't know if anyone else noticed. All the questions so far have come from California. Nelson Shuker from California. My question is, if someone's a new caller, and you Norm, showed your card that you had for scootback, I assume that you've got similar cards for other moves, okay? So not necessarily if they're a new caller, but maybe even if they're an old caller that just now wants to get serious. How do they get hold of those cards? How do they come up with the material? We've all heard it said there's no substitute for pushing the checkers yourself. Is there any way to get that material other than years and years of practice?
Yes.
Yes. Feel it.
There is a handout that is available through CALLERLAB called the Call Analysis Sheet. That, to me, is perhaps one of the best single resource materials that we have. If it came from an idea from the Willamette Callers Association, it was sent to the CALLERLAB office when I was executive director, and we modified that in some of the caller schools we did to its present form. It wants to make sure that you know the definition of the call and the allowable formations from which you can do that call. And one of the ways that we might do this in a caller school would be to say, make a T-bar, list the call, or the formation from which you can do it. Let's say facing lines of 4. And on the left-hand column, write down every call that you can do from facing lines of 4. And you give them maybe 5 or 10 minutes to do this. And you say, is everybody done? Some people will have 5 things they could do from lines of 4. Some guys will have 15 or 20. Some wives might have 35. And the reason I'm saying it this way is that we all think of certain things that we normally would do from that. And then you go down the list. And you say, okay, did I do this? Could I do this? And so forth and so on. And then you start to see, well, gee, I forgot circle left. I forgot circle right. I forgot forward and back. And suddenly you say, gee, there are a lot more things that I could do. And that's the self-improvement. That's the way that you say, I could have done this. The thing that we see most in caller schools that vary is that they don't realize the effect of what they do, and they create an arrangement that does not enable them to do the call that they would like to do next. They get the dancers in a half-side shade formation in lines of 4, for instance, to say right and left through. Well, that's not allowed at mainstream. Only the centers could do the right and left through because they're the only ones with the girl and the boy's right. And that's the approach that I would take to people, that as you learn the call, how do you move people? What can I do legitimately without changing the definition or without trying to make it difficult for the dancers? Does that answer your question, Nazar? Okay.
Yeah, my facetious comment about stealing, be sensitive to what other callers do when you're dancing to them. Do they use a neat thing maybe you hadn't thought of? For instance, like going back to scoot back, would you have thought of having the boys fold? Would you have a thought of having the girls turn through and everybody star through and promenade? Things like this. But if you hear someone do that, you think, that's a neat idea. Go and write it down after it tips over. Just a general idea. And you compile these in a notebook. Another way to do it is to subscribe to a note service and pick up ideas from there. But as John says, this is what I did that day. I sat down and wrote down scoot back, and then everything I could possibly do after scoot back, which is essentially what John was saying about with the analysis sheet.
All I'd like to emphasize with that analysis sheet is, and you're a new caller, there's no obligation that you have to come up with everything you can do from a given call the first time you do that analysis. I mean, it's a process that over time you're going to come back, or you should come back to that same exercise and see what else you can add now that you hadn't thought of before. So, but just to get that started is going to give you a lot of material to work with. Other questions? Can't have answered everybody's thought that's come through during this session.
Let me just ask all of you to take out a piece of paper and right across the top, make a horizontal line, say facing lines of 4, and a vertical line down the center. And I've given you about 6 things that you could do, so don't use any of those 6. And write down every other thing that you could do from facing lines of 4, normal arrangement. Normal arrangement being defined as a boy with a girl on the boy's right. And you use the back of one of these handout sheets if you want, or a new piece of paper, or whatever you would like to do. And we'll take just maybe 5 minutes. I don't know whether you want to pause that tape while we do this so we don't have a blank spot on the tape, Norm. It might be a little bit better if we do it that way. There should be a pause button on there somewhere, is there? Well, then we'll just keep talking while they're doing it. Yeah, if you got to pause, that's good. Just going to take a couple of minutes on to do this, guys. I don't want to take an awful lot of time, but think what you could do from facing lines of 4. And every time that you write down a new call, you always will be starting from facing lines of 4, normal arrangement. Yeah, let's restrict it mainstream because it's going to make it more of a educational experience that way.
Only mainstream only.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that creates a problem for some of you that they're working with the other programs, but it's still an essential part of what you should be doing and be able to do. I got to tell you, one thing I was calling a 3/4 dance, and I put them in a position where he did a pass through and trade by, and I said touch a quarter. And after I said touch a quarter, I realized they didn't know scoot back. What do? Centers trade twice. Swing and promenade. 3 callers stepped out of the floor and wrote that down because they had never thought that you could do that. But that's the kind of thing. Now that, Master, you're not going to be able to do as a new caller because you can't think that quickly on your feet. But I was lucky that day that the centers trade twice seemed to work well for me, and it was a great reaction from the other callers who were there. Anybody run out of things to do there yet? Harold, you got them all down? You and Lee? You're not going to play? You're in trouble. Oh, yeah. Is it a mental cramp or a writer's cramp? Okay, let's take it back on now.
And don't forget, since we're not microphones all over the place, they repeat all their calls.
Yeah, right. If you shout it out, we'll just repeat it here from the stage. We'll start right up here with you, Ron. What do you have?
Face right.
Face right. Good. How many of you had face right? One other person. Okay, I assume that the next person is going to... Ron, we'll start with you. Partner trade. Good call. You could have said face left. That would have been equally good, wouldn't it? That's the part thing. Okay, Harold, come on. What? Next call. Oh, get out of here. Lee. Lee, give us the next call. Yes, sir. That's 2 calls. Yeah. Pass through is fine. Lonnie? I'm sorry, what? Boys walk, girls dodge. Legitimate call from facing lines of 4? Well, we didn't talk about body flow. We're talking about what you can do from there, and it gives you an idea. You might want to say, well, what would I use to follow that call that's going to flow? If you say boys walk and the girls dodge, boys might want to run, or boys might want to fold behind the girl.
Or a single hinge.
Or you might want to do a single hinge, or a lot of things. But that's that's the second phase of that exercise. After you've done this and you've checked the mainstream program to see what you can legitimately do, what is the result of having done that next call? And then you proceed from that to say, okay, if I've done this and I resolve here, what can I do to follow that call? And that goes back to your call analysis sheet, because one of the things on there is, what is a good preceding call? What is a good call to follow? Are hands required? Are hands available? And when they say hands available, it used to be we should never use the same hand twice in a row. But if I do a head square through 4 and star through, that's fine for the boy, isn't it? Because he's using his right hand. The girl's using her left hand, and it's not available because she pulled by and her left hand is behind her. Slide through says it's a no hands move, therefore the hand availability is not an issue, and now both hands are free. That's part of the call analysis sheet. That's part of the micro-programming decision that you would be making as you go on to these next calls. Gentleman right behind him. Mr. Right and left too, sure. Who's next over there? I can't see where the row starts. Yes, come on. Yeah. Right and left grand. Can you do a right and left grand from a line of 4 facing? Sure. How many of you call that regularly? That's not the issue. Yes, sir. Center square through 3? Okay. All 8 circulate? What would you expect the dancers to do? Pass through. Would your dancers be able to do that if you call that the first time you called for this club? Probably not. So maybe that judgment says, don't do that one until you work with them a little bit, because they have to understand what a pass-through does from facing dancers.
All right, the most common one would be a star.
Sure, that's fine. Nasser. I won't even honor that one on the tape. Square through 2.5 hands. What degree of success would you expect? 0. What does judgment tell you?
A lot would depend on where you put this and what you've done to prep the dancers ahead of time.
But if you had them in facing lines of 4, you called square through 2.5 hands, what would you expect them to be when they finished that move? Tidal wave? Okay. You weren't expecting to be in a tidal wave? The next gentleman over here. Okay, this young lady here, that's fine. Boys run, sure. Pass the, how about the man in front of you there? Oh, okay. That's a perfectly good one. It's not called Pass the Ocean, but that's all right. I'm sorry. Couldn't help myself. In the back, but you tuck. Pass through, we gave you that as a given, so come up with another one, please. Touch a quarter's fine. Could you do a left touch a quarter? No reason you can't. Okay, could you do a left square through? No reason you can't.
Have you found people have problems with left square throughs? I found a neat little idea that seems to work. go forward and back. Start with your left hand and square through.
Sure.
Rather than let's square through, start with your left hand and square through.
It's a helper word, but it's also what I think Mike Jacobs referred to it as a clue word. It gives them a hint as to what they should do in order to be successful. Starting with your left hand, do a left square through 4. The same thing is true if you do some things with the left-handed wave setup and you say swing through, you better preface that with it starts with the right, because if you don't, they're not going to be expecting it. They're going to go right down the tubes. On the other hand, if you had them in a left-handed wave and you call spin the top, do they have to start in the center? They better not, because the definition says what? Ends in the adjacent centers, turn half. So that's the part of the part of the distinction of using the call analysis sheet so that you know what the definition is, what's allowable and what's not. But this kind of exercise is great for caller association meetings to just prove to them there's really a lot of stuff out there that we don't use that we could use, and the dancers can still win. And really, you can do this for any program. You can do it with the advanced program. I suppose you could do it with the challenge program or not, but certainly the mainstream and the plus program, if those are the programs that you're calling, you should be able to do this for every call, every formation that you use. And it's interesting, if you get to the handout that they have in the CALLERLAB office of the formations, I think they have some 50 or 60 listed there. You can create every one of those with a mainstream call. But most of the time, we don't think mainstream calls from which to follow on, because we know, gee, what a great setup for da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and that might be on the A2 program or the A1 program. So you have to figure out, what can I use to get into this? What can I use after I get into this that flows and works well? And you got to think of trades, you got to think of hinges, you got to think of tags and things of that nature, and are they going to work smoothly? I didn't hear anyone say tag the line, but we certainly could have done that. I didn't hear anyone say wheel and deal from facing lines. We could have done that. What success rate would you have? Not 100%. It's not going to happen. So that becomes a judgment call as part of your programming, a microprogramming decision. We have a question all the way in the back. Wait a minute. Got to get on the mic, sir, and your name?
Wes McCarthy Branson. How about a partner hinge?
Is that mainstream?
Yep.
No. It was taken off the list.
Off the list?
Yes, at mainstream. And same thing is, it's not on the plus program either.
A dandy you forgot, but you have to prep them for, but you don't have to walk it through, is boys swing through.
Okay. I would allow that, but I would say if you're doing that, what are you doing to the dancers? You're starting to force them to think like callers, that the boys have to step forward to a wave and then do their swing through. Judgment would...
That was why I said you had to prep them.
Yeah, absolutely prep them, or give them some helper words to make sure they succeed. Even at the advanced program, if you say head spin the top and you don't prep them, 90% of them are going to go right down the tube.
Oh, to do a fan the top.
Well, but the point is, if you don't prep them, they're going to go down the tubes because you've called something that is infrequently used or from an unusual formation or unusual arrangement, and then you might have a combination of three things, and that makes it very difficult to do. Okay. That's a good exercise, though.
All right. We're pretty close. We've got about 5 minutes till 5, so I think it's pretty time to close it down unless there's any last questions. Not seeing anything. I want to thank Norm and John for a very pleasant session, and hopefully some things you can take home and think about. Prepare, but be flexible, and go out and program. Thank you.